question is, do you think increased access of cell phone usage in deployment is positive or negative?
Overall, I think it's positive. I think people should be allowed to use cell phones, generally speaking. Um, Depending on the circumstances, should be, I guess, more or less limited. But that's depending on the circumstance.
What kind of circumstances are you talking about?
If you're in a combat arms branch, which is either armor or infantry, armor being people with tanks and things of that nature, it should be more limited because those people serve on the front lines, and they should be focusing on being on the front lines, which means they can be attacked really at any moment. Whereas people that are more in logistics and support, which is the vast majority of the Army, I think they should be able to use it as long as it's outside of the workday, which is a typical 9 to 5 real desk job.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And how do you think if there's a cell phone policy, how do you think it should be regulated?
Again, I think it should be regulated purely based on jobs. I don't think it should be based for the entire Army or the entire military as a whole, but just based on what your job is. I think if they're on the front lines, you should be regulated maybe once a week. But if you're not on the front lines, as long as you're not actually working, anytime you have time off, I think you should be able to use as much as you want.
Okay. And how do you think it affects people back at home when they have this constant open access to speak with their loved ones who are deployed? Do you think it's too much of a good thing? It's too much of a good thing that's a bad thing for people who are eagerly waiting for a phone call or a text message from their son, their daughter, whatever it is. What do you think about that?
I think it's circumstantial. I think for the most part it's a good thing, but I think when other people have issues at home, such as their spouse or maybe children or other family members that may have some kind of problem, like a health concern or something of that nature, I think it could be a huge distraction because now not only do they have to worry about what's going on in their life when they're like deployed in Iraq or Afghanistan, but they also have to worry about what's going on at home, about their spouse who may be sick or maybe in financial trouble, or a child who isn't performing very well in school, or something of that nature. I think in those circumstances, then it's more detrimental to have those distractions there.
I think that the ability to respond to family at home while overseas is a great improvement in technology, although the constant ability to use it wouldn't be. I think it would be a detriment, and it would definitely drive down focus of people who are in dangerous areas or have important jobs they need to be doing.
Okay. How do you think that cell phone usage should be regulated?
Designated by a certain amount of time over a certain period of time, like for 2 hours a month, one day. Probably be a good idea, something like that, so that people can manage their lives because they have children and financial situations and other things, but not to a point where it's a steady flow of communication.
Well, that depends. While the connectivity to your family is always a positive thing, you can monitor what's going on at home, your wife, your children, how they're coping with your absence. At the same time, your main responsibility is to fight a war and come home alive. So, while I believe that cell phones are a good thing, they should be monitored and regulated.
Okay, how do you think they should be regulated?
I would limit it to perhaps once a week phone call home. That seems fair enough, because not only do cell phones pose a risk to your personal safety by distracting you, you have to deal with all the stressors of life at home and whatnot. There are also security risks. I mean, most cell phones today have global positioning systems in them, so you have to consider the security risks that cell phones pose on a military operating basis.